on your digital transformation journey. So I've been in this software development space now for 20 plus years. And one of the things that's most exciting to me is that I think I'm able to be successful at this because I was a user at some point. I started my journey as an accountant right out of college, working for a company that was implementing an ERP system, Oracle at the time. And so I came over into the IT field from just being a SME on a transformation initiative. And so it's near and dear to my heart to be able to leverage software development and take companies to the next level. So my introduction and agenda here, I'll talk about the fear of transformation journey. Why do people fear it, right? What is the big deal? What are we afraid of? And certainly there are many things to consider there. The 6 M's to consider on the journey, and then some things that you don't want to avoid. And so as I talk about the fear of the transformation journey, this term FOMO comes to mind, fear of missing out, right? And oftentimes I work with the C-suite along with key stakeholders in this space, and they realize that if they don't modernize and embrace agility, do things like reduce their capital expenditures and operating expenses, that they really won't be successful in helping their organizations to perform. So most times when you think about this, it seems like it's a pretty good value proposition to move forward with this. But there's a fear. There's a fear of missing out on one hand that says, hey, we gotta do it right, whether you're a regulated industry or not, we absolutely have to digitize and transform our organization. But then there's also this fear of moving forward. And some of the things that, when I think about fear of moving forward, some of the conversations that I've had, whether it's been with the CFO or, you know, the CIO, COOs of organizations, is, you know, they start to think about things like, what if we change? Like, what if our organization changes once we've decided to go to the cloud? What does that mean, right? What if our infrastructure changes? What if the resources from the provider standpoint changes? Can we move back away from the cloud? And so it's interesting how you hear fear in the voices of leaders as it relates to that. They're fearful of data security, right? One of the most common fears that we hear is that the cloud may not have sufficient security. After all, you're entrusting another party basically with your data and your security. But one of the things that we should go on record to state is these providers of the cloud pay very close attention to security. And so we need to just dispel that myth that there's a fear or lack of data security in the cloud. They're fearful of accessibility, right? Like, I am giving someone else control of my world, of my environment. What if I can't access it, right? I don't have a DBA right now that I can go touch and say, hey, restart the server or something. And again, these providers understand that lots of businesses hinge on the fact that you have to have your systems up. So we can dispel that as well. Then there's the fear of high expenses. And this is real, y'all. I am actually living this now. And I've done tons of implementations, right? Transformations where we get excited as IT professionals about doing something that's on the latest and the greatest, right? And we're moving away from some stale legacy systems, and we'll be like, you know, top on our list is we implemented the latest and greatest as it relates to the cloud. But when it comes to these high expenses, we get excited and we start signing up for subscriptions and things that sometimes we don't necessarily leverage, right? And I recently ran across something similar to this where, you know, 3 years ago when we signed our initial contract, we were going to do all these big things, right? And stuff happens within an organization. And so you find yourself paying sometimes for things that you're really not ready as an organization to leverage. So certainly the fear of high expenses is real. And then there is the fear of losing control, right? Like, we think about the physical servers that we have, and we're attached to them for the most part. And it feels like we're turning this over to somebody else. I like to think of it as just a delegation of duties, right? And so you sometimes move your data offsite. Doesn't mean that you're really losing control. It's a physical server move. And I think it's illusory when you start thinking about the loss of control when migrating into the cloud, right? Especially when it comes to security, because the bottom line is your data is only as vulnerable as your security protocols, whether you are on-prem or in the cloud. So certainly that fear of missing out, and then on top of that, the fear of moving forward. But now I want to talk about, this is really the meat of my presentation, the 6 M's to consider when you're talking about a digital transformation or modernizing your organization or moving to the cloud, however you guys want to position that. And so folks have asked me, like, why the M's? It was 3 a.m. I was working on my presentation for Eagle Dream when they came to Jacksonville, and my name begins with an M, Melissa. I know, so creative, right? Anyway, so somehow my juices were flowing and I was able to match something to consider with my famous initials. So first thing is the mindset, right? When you start talking about transitioning to the cloud, there is not just a shift in the way you think, but an entire new paradigm shift, and not just for IT, for the business as well. And what I found in, like I said, a lot of implementations went well, but then there were some that I've led that not so much, didn't go so well. And the times that I reflect on the things that didn't go well, it's usually when you really have not prepared yourself mentally. And I say yourself, meaning the organization at large, the business, as well as IT, as well as our leadership, right? For what this transformation is going to look like. In most instances, it's huge, right? And it is going to change the way people work and the way that they have to think about doing their work. And so I think about how, traditionally the world of developers that you have, right? And they're able to sit down, and when a user says, hey, I want something, they just go and they just kind of make it happen, right? Whether they're changing code, they make it happen. And so when you start talking about migrating over into the cloud or digitizing your organizations, your teams start to work a little differently, right? You start seeing things like, your developers, the DevOps process and the SDLC process having to come together. So it's no longer siloed, but it's integrated. And so as IT, as a business, we have to work differently when you start thinking about migrating to the cloud. So that means that your organization structure may even look a little bit different. And so there's something to think about, that your people are in the right frame of mind. And what I've also learned is that oftentimes when we start talking about moving to the cloud, I talked about as IT, we get excited about this, right? And we want to lead this charge. I absolutely, positively am convinced that this needs to be business-led, right? IT, sometimes we forget that we're really a support organization, right? And we're there to provide solutions, but we can't tell you what your business really needs to do. And so I have lived where initiatives have been IT focused and led, and those that have been heavy involvement from the business, an executive sponsor, a real champion for this. And those are the ones that really work well. But there's a paradigm shift, right? Because the business wants to just say, hey, this is what I want, now go do it. But we need involvement from the business. And this really speaks to change management. So listen, y'all, I didn't grow up an IT girl. Like I said, my major was accounting, and I worked in accounting as a user and migrated over. So I'm very sensitive to making sure that the business is heard when it comes to delivering these types of initiatives. And all too often, again, we got some smart developers, engineers, these folks live to build. They just want to go in a dark room and start making some stuff happen. But I have learned that whenever you do this, and there is not 100% participation, dedicated focus from the business, that you're not going to be highly successful. So it's a paradigm shift, and it's a new way of how we think about this. And the reason why is, and I'll talk about this a little later on, is that how you develop your business processes is really how you get success out of this system, right? So no need to go showing how smart we are as IT and how we can stand up, great systems. You got to bring the business along. It's a new way of working and a new way of thinking. The other thing when it comes to what to consider is money, quite naturally. They're expensive, right? It's huge. All transformation initiatives require an upfront capital investment. We know that. Ongoing maintenance, right? Dedicated staffs to maintain this, and potentially some additional operating expenses. And so you got to know what these costs are upfront. And a lot of times we don't do all of our homework, right? Again, we get excited about this, and we leave some things unsaid, untalked about, right? And these providers, they sell you on the fact that everything is centrally owned and managed, and so it's going to be a cost savings. And I do believe that it is, but there are a whole lot of other costs that are associated with it, right? You got to start thinking about, okay, while we're doing the project, maybe it's capital dollars, but once we're live, is the business prepared to have ongoing operating expenses associated with this? So the cost, the money part of it, absolutely, make sure you focus on it. And what's happening typical heavy lifting related to racking and stacking and the powering of servers. And so think about the costs that are associated with that. And then there's the model. There are all types of ways we can implement transformation or modernize or digitize, right? You got infrastructure as a service, you got PaaS out there, you got software as a service. And so depending on your organizational goals, you have to determine what model really works for you, right? So for example, if you wanted to go with infrastructure as a service, right? Maybe there's a high dependency, if you will, on IT resources, as opposed to if you went to SaaS, it frees up some IT resources and it gets a rapid deployment. So you got to think about the model that you actually want to use. No right or wrong, right? It's just a conversation of what really works for our organization. And, you know, when I think about model, I think about not just, you know, whether it's going to be a PaaS implementation or a SaaS implementation, which is really hot right now, but I start thinking about the operating model from the organization that you're in. Again, I've led an initiative where we started building because we thought we had requirements and we thought we knew exactly where they were going. And what ended up happening was we did a lift and shift. So we brought bad stuff into new technology and expected something different, right? To me, that's just complete. I won't say what I want to say, but to me, it's a no-brainer that garbage in, garbage out is exactly what you're going to get. So take some time to think about what the organization wants to be when they grow up and let that factor into the model that you're actually going to use. And then there is the actual move. How do you know when it's time to modernize your organization, right? And so, you know, one of the things I think about is when you start talking about you got hardware that's at end of life and you're trying to determine how we're going to support that, you know, are we going to renew contract? That's certainly a sign. Then I think about walking into, look at your physical servers and it's hot and they're loud and you can fry an egg on top of them. And I'm exaggerating right now, but y'all get the point. Those of y'all that know anything about servers, it's cold in there. So when they start giving you problems, that's a clear sign that it's time to modernize, right? I think about compatibility issues that start to arise. So, you know, listen, people know, companies know right now that if you want to remain in the game, you've got to start doing it. You've got to modernize. Like you can't be competitive and get to market quicker on some of the legacy systems that we grew up on, right? Some of the homegrown systems. And so when you start talking about compatibility issues because you're working with vendors and you got integrations and they've migrated already and then you're still kind of lingering, it's time to move, right? And then increased system management time. When you're spending a ton of time on with your resources, you know, doing applying patches, building, adding on, changing code, you know, stuff isn't working anymore. That's a sign that it's probably time to digitize your organization. So when to move is essential. And sometimes we don't really sit down to do the business case of what we're really spending on these legacy systems, right? We don't really start thinking about what can I sunset? What can I really do without? And part of it goes back to change management is that the business ain't ready. They ain't ready to let go of the system that they've been using for 25 years, right? And you're coming and you're trying to move away their cheese. And so those are some things to think about when you're starting to talk about when is it time to move, right? And then I think about migration. Like, so my mindset is right. You know, we work with finance, we got a budget. We kind of know the model or the approach that we want, and we know it's time, right? But how do we do this? Like, what does that really look like from an implementation standpoint, right? Bring it. We already know that it's exhaustive, especially for larger companies, to bring over their infrastructure and their applications into the cloud, right? So you got to be considerate to the business in terms of having them tell you what makes sense to bring over when, right? Do we want to do it at the end of the year, at the end of our fiscal year? Well, maybe we got a lot going on then. Do you want to do it in January? Well, maybe that's open enrollment. There's a whole lot going on, you know, on the HR front. So when to migrate is just as important as all of the previous legwork that you've done to determine, yeah, I want to do it. Got all your ducks in a row, but when to do it is critical, right? Start talking about payroll. You can't cross over in a certain payroll period or something. So all those things need to go into consideration. And again, the business should be leading that, right? And then I think about maintenance as it relates to maintenance, right? Because when you start talking about maintaining your applications in the cloud, it's a different conversation. No longer, again, can I go to the DBAs and say, hey, we're going to determine when it's time for us to apply these patches. And oh, by the way, we're going to wait because we got a little something going on this weekend and we don't want to do it. Most of these providers are mandating that you update your systems, right? Think about Apple, right? You wake up in the morning, your bank or Apple has said, hey, there's a mandatory update that has to happen. You can't email Apple or your bank and say, hey, no, don't do it on Melissa's phone. I think I want to wait 6 months. Absolutely not. And so you have to make sure that your organization is in tune with the fact that we're going to be on the latest and greatest because we now have to have these patches done. And so there's a whole lot of work that's associated with that. And you know, the best way, of course, is to automate this, right? I like to think about patching as when you think about healthy habits, right? Like eating and exercising. Those things are tedious, right? And we don't always consider them fun. We probably got a few little workout buffs that are on this call today, but to me, it ain't fun. And it ain't nothing that I just wake up in the morning and I'm excited about doing. But I think of IT maintenance tasks as a very similar appeal, right? But with automation. So if I had somebody that was automating, hey, Melissa, here's your food, now eat it, it's 9 o'clock. Hey, Melissa, go get on your treadmill, it's like noon. Hey, Melissa, go run 2 miles. Then maybe that will make it more palatable. So certainly when you're talking about maintenance for the cloud, you absolutely must consider automation. All right, so those are just the 6 things that when I think about migrating, these are the things that stand out, migrating into modernized technology, if you will. These are the 6 things that over the 20 years of my life have really kept me up at night, making sure that they are in place. Now, then there's some things in terms of what you don't want to avoid, right? There's some things you want to avoid, but then there's some things that you don't want to avoid. And I touched on this a little bit when as it relates to business processes. Listen, you absolutely positively have to make sure you have some good business processes. In the absence of that, you're not bringing the business along, right? Just standing up a system, like I said, and saying, hey, we're going to throw this in all of our current business processes in, garbage in, garbage out. That's called a lift and shift, right? And I have some experience recently, not too long ago, where we did an effort like that. And you're paying for it after the fact, believe me. So spend the time that it takes. And this is always just so tedious, right? The business doesn't want to spend time with IT regurgitating what they do on a daily basis. But it behooves you as an organization to make sure that you have some solid business processes, right, wrong, or indifferent, right? You have an opportunity to transform them when you get into this new technology, right? And be open to business process change. That goes back to my change management conversation, right? You've got to have a mindset to say, okay, I'm going to the cloud. The very fact that you signed up for cloud means that there's some level of standardization that you're signing up for, right? No more do I go to Billy and say, hey, go just code this and give me exactly what I want. There's standardization that's involved. And then your operating model is important, knowing what you want to be when you grow up. Organizational culture. Wow, this is big. And again, I just have to give kudos to my team because I know they're listening. They promised me that they would be, and I'm going to give them a quiz on it after the fact, although they live this every day. You have to have a culture that's ready for this. You've got to be ready for it because it's a big deal. It is transformation. It's not just taking what you have, putting it over there, but there is a whole level of change that's got to be done in the minds of the people in order to really say as an organization, we are ready. And then be prepared to fail fast, right? I am of the opinion that if you don't like to fail, maybe you ain't ready to go. Maybe that's part of the mindset, right? Be able to fail fast, bounce back from it, regroup, be agile, be flexible, and know how to move forward when you start talking about a journey of this magnitude. So that's all I have. I don't want to run over my time. I have 15 minutes, and I know I talk really fast, but my folks who know me, who's on this call, can tell you this ain't the fastest. I can like talk faster than this if I need to. So thank you guys for listening. Change is inevitable. It's got to happen. And so hopefully I said something today that will help prepare you guys and your organization for these types of transformations. Thank you so much.
Melissa, that was awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
That was fantastic. Before we move on, Anthony, can I ask you 2 quick questions?
Yes.
From your talk, I know Cora mentioned this in the chat box earlier when you were talking about mindset. I think one key thing I know that organizations we work with struggle with is how to align stakeholders in your organization.
Oh my God.
Can you maybe expand upon any recommendations you have for aligning your management team or those key stakeholders and making the decision around
Absolutely.
transformation?
Absolutely. We call this, or I call this, the city council approach, right? On implementations where this has gone really well, we have done what's called the city council approach, where every key stakeholder that has skin in the game on this particular transformation, I have personally sat with them and asked them, what are the top 3 things that you are, your KPIs that you're concerned about, right? And I make sure that every time I stand before them, or if we're doing any campaigns, that I'm mentioning that, right? To get them on board. And I make them, I ask them to come to our meetings. I have them talk to the IT team. But if you don't stop, by, pay a visit, hear their voices. Listen, we have had, and this is me trying to encourage executives to own this, right? I'm like, listen, if what we're after is to have what's called a golden record, I'll call it that. One of my CEOs previously said, we're working on this transformation because it's the golden record. I would ask him, anytime you get up before the organization, talk about the golden record, so that the guy that's in the elevator that knows nothing about technology, at least he's heard the CEO say, we're working on the golden record. So I say, involve your executive leadership team really, really early on, understand what they want, and make it a part of your conversation. City council approach. Hope that helps.
Awesome. No, that's great. And the last thing that I think is also important too, that I'd love your feedback on, is I've seen firsthand how you interact with your team when we were with you in Jacksonville, and how you empower your team, inspire them, and make sure everyone's on board. What are some ways that you kind of build that culture for your team and ensure that everyone is on the same page and everyone on your team is aligned?
Sure. So the first thing I like to say, as it relates to leadership anytime, is that my people hopefully can attest to the fact that they know that I appreciate them. Right, first and foremost, right? Anytime I meet with my team, the very first thing we talk about is, how are you doing? How is your family? I know their kid's name. I know their spouse's name. I call it out by, it starts with them. And so I am a people connector. And so it's easy for me, with the type of personality that I have, right, to engage my people. It's not just about the work, but it's about the people, right? And I am a firm believer that my people want to do a good job for their leader. It's because I invest in them, and I am conversating with them, right? And they'll tell you, like, on our team, it's safety zone. We were just laughing about this. Like, we can cut up and we can really act really silly, but when it's time to deliver, I have no problems with them, because we are a team, we're a family. And so the family wants to do well for the family at large. And so I am promoting my people every chance I get. What I am smart enough to know is that it's not me that makes this stuff happen. It's the team. And so I have a dream team, and I let them know every chance I get how appreciative I am of them. And it works.
Love it. Awesome. Thank you so much, Melissa, for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, guys.